Hey, how's it going? So for thousands of years, military power on Earth has been shaped by geography. If you want to invade a country, you've got to go through the forests, you've got to go over the mountains, you've got to get past the oceans. Big empires with lots of people and lots of territory can project power really far, but then logistically you become reliant on trade routes and things like this. It's all kind of influenced by geography. But now, in the 21st century, humanity is beginning to develop a new strategic military environment: space. And at this point, there is no question as to whether humanity will expand beyond the Earth or not. We are definitely going to do that. The question now is what happens when multiple governments, corporations, potentially even independent settlements begin operating beyond the Earth's atmosphere? Because I think that the first powers to establish permanent industrial capabilities in space, particularly on the moon, might gain a huge advantage. An advantage so big that it hands them the keys to the solar system. Let's talk about it. So whilst culturally we talk about Mars quite a lot, really the moon is the most strategically important location in the solar system. Not because the moon is the most habitable, but because it's simultaneously an easy place to get to the rest of the solar system from, as well as also being close to Earth, and also being a giant ball of materials with which we can industrialize. And it is possible to develop colonies that would allow us to live there. Not the easiest thing to do, but it is totally doable. And all of this means that the moon is sitting at the crossroads of the solar system. All the humans are on Earth now, an effectively infinite amount of resources are out there in deep space, and for a variety of reasons, not least orbital mechanics, all roads lead through the moon. So whoever develops the ability to mine, manufacture, launch spacecraft from the lunar surface could gain a major advantage in the future space economy and security environment. But an interesting question that depends on how things unfold over time is, will space become a multipolar domain where lots of different factions of humanity are competing with each other, or will the first power to industrialize the moon basically stand at the gates of space and prevent anyone else from passing unless the established power specifically allows them through? Now, it's worth specifying, when I'm saying that the moon is at the crossroads of the solar system, I don't mean that spacecraft literally have to go from the Earth to the moon and then from the moon onto other celestial bodies. What I really mean, and the reason why the moon is such an incredible place, is that it's so comparatively easy to launch from the moon into deep space compared to the Earth, that you could do the same mission to Mars, for example, with a rocket a fraction of the size of one that was launched from the Earth. So if you are some kind of entity, some kind of organization that wants to project power out into the solar system, really what you want is for your starting position to be in as shallow of a gravitational well as possible. Like, the Earth has so much gravity that you've got to fight directly against, and you're just throwing fuel away trying to get away from the force of the Earth's gravity pulling you down, on top of the fact that you've got to fight through the atmosphere as well. While launching from the moon, you do still have to get away from the moon's gravity, but it's so comparatively weak, it's really not that big of a deal. Most of your fuel can be used on doing the actual orbital transfers that need to happen regardless, rather than just fighting the celestial body from which you're launching. Now, you could say, why don't we just live in giant orbital habitats, Gundam style? We could just put some O'Neill cylinders at the Lagrange points and live there and project power from those locations. And yes, you could do that, but you do still need the material to build and maintain those space habitats. And if you're building or maintaining them anywhere in orbit of the Earth, where's the most efficient place to get all that material from? The moon. And let's say we're not even talking about the Earth or the moon. Let's say we're talking about building O'Neill cylinders in orbit of Mars, or industrializing Mars's moons, or living on the surface of Mars, or other planets throughout the solar system. Again, that could work. You could industrialize those places, you could project power from there, but in order to get into that situation, human beings need to get from where we are now to those places initially, and bring enough stuff with them to make that happen. And the only way that that's realistically going to happen, given the sheer mass of the equipment and the number of people that you're going to have to bring for that to be viable, is to do it from Earth's moon after it's been industrialized. That's by far the most efficient, and therefore also the fastest way to do that. You see what I mean? I can absolutely see the moon being a huge flashpoint for conflict. Now, it's interesting to know that at this point, because also, if we want to look at this from a cultural perspective, most people, like in the general populace, don't really give a shit about crewed space travel, which I'm very sad about, and I'm sure you are too if you're the kind of person that's watching this video. But at least for me, I mean, maybe you've had a different experience, and it'd be great if you have. But when I'm talking to people out in the wild, people tend to communicate to me that they think of space exploration as this costly, wasteful thing that doesn't achieve anything, and we should fix the Earth first, and we should be using that money to build children's hospitals and all this kind of stuff. The public seems to be hypersensitive to any spending on spaceflight. There just seems to be an endless horde of normies itching for an excuse to complain about it. Just seems to be a thing. I guess to a lot of people it doesn't seem like it has any immediate utility. And I mean, to be fair, it doesn't really directly affect most people, so I can understand why they'd be that way. But my point in talking about this is that in order for a government to have a space agency that establishes itself on the moon and industrializes the moon, there probably needs to be some public willpower behind doing that, or at least it would help a lot. The two leading powers at the moment are the coalition led by the United States and also China, and it remains to be seen who's actually going to get there first, set up a base first, and then who's going to develop the quickest when they're there, and whether the development is going to be mostly cooperative or whether there's going to be some friction. To be clear, I'm not saying there's going to be an all-out war breakout between two early moon bases of different nations, but I'd be very surprised if 100 years from now there haven't been any wars on the moon or over the moon. As time goes on and the public becomes more aware of the situation, I think a lot of nations are going to want to have a very firm foothold on at least some part of the moon. The public narrative is going to change from why are we spending so much on useless space travel to why have we not been spending money on this for decades and now we've let a bunch of other nations get ahead of us and they're going to materially benefit from it and we're going to be dependent on them. There's also the whole corporate angle of this as well, because it's not far-fetched at all to imagine, for example, SpaceX or some kind of analogous future entity like SpaceX having a base on the moon. They could even be the main ones colonizing and calling the shots, and maybe even making their own independent colonies, because unless you, as the government, already have a base there, how are you going to force another entity to not do that? You know what I mean? I guess you could prevent them from launching from Earth, but you'd probably not have a problem with them initially setting up a base there, but if you wanted them to stop expanding, sure, you can prevent any further launches from the Earth, but they might be mostly self-sustaining by then anyway, so they can just spread out and colonize more and more of the moon independently, at which point you have lost control of them and you can't govern them anymore. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, go ahead and leave a completely unhinged comment, insult, or compliment below the video, like the ones I used to describe my supporters in the credits. If I think your comment is funny enough, I might actually use it at the end of future videos, so go ahead and do that, or I am going to come over to your house and do this. Alright, thanks, back to the video. Now, an interesting angle of this whole thing is, if you had an industrialized moon base, and let's say for the sake of simplicity that only one entity has successfully done that. So for example, the Chinese government has a base on the moon, or the US government has a base on the moon, or whatever, but it's only one faction that's managed to do that. Could they detect the presence of spacecraft trying to get from the Earth out into deep space and launch a missile that destroys that spacecraft and prevents that from happening? In other words, could whoever is first to develop the moon prevent anyone else from ever gaining access to space whatsoever? And I think the answer is yes, with one or two asterisks, but mostly yes. Whether or not you can send spacecraft launching from the Earth is largely down to what sensors you've got, but yeah, it's totally possible to do. And I suppose a spacecraft trying to hide could just launch from the side of the Earth that the moon isn't currently looking at. But if you're on the moon and you're trying to track all the launches from Earth, all you need to do is have a few different satellites in varying orbits around the Earth, pointed at the Earth and relaying their information to you, and that would totally address the problem. So there isn't really anywhere to hide. Space launches are inherently pretty energetic, so you can't really hide them from a good enough infrared sensor. I suppose you could ask whether it's possible to then shoot those satellites down. If they were in low Earth orbit, it certainly would be, but if they're in high enough orbits, they'd be able to track the missile trying to hit them and either move out of the way or send an interceptor that prevents it from getting to the satellite. In terms of intercepting anything coming from the Earth and going out into space, you can just wait until the spacecraft enters the coast phase, because spacecraft cannot continually accelerate in the same way that a car or a plane can. They have a few minutes of very rapid acceleration, followed by however many days, weeks, months, or years it takes to get to their destination, where they're just drifting with their engines off. Like, for example, to get to the moon, it takes a few days, and you've only got your engines turned on for the first few minutes. So if you want to use some kind of homing device launched by a missile from the moon to hit a spacecraft that's trying to escape from the Earth into space, it's going to be really easy to track that thing because it's going to be very bright in the infrared spectrum when it launches, and then the interceptor that you've launched from the moon, or from lunar orbit, or somewhere in orbit of the Earth, I mean, realistically, you could probably remotely fire missiles which are stored in low Earth orbit. Either way, you can launch this interceptor and just make sure it ends up on a trajectory that intersects the trajectory of whatever thing it's trying to hit. It basically just needs to do a big boost at the beginning to put it onto that trajectory, and then when it gets close, do a secondary boost that actually takes it directly to the target and make sure it hits it at a really high velocity. So honestly, in this unipolar lunar situation, I think there's a good chance whatever entity controls the moon basically just controls controls space full stop. Now this calculus does change if there is a multipolar situation on the moon. If the US and China both simultaneously develop industrial capacity without screwing each other over too hard, then we'll end up in a situation where everything I've just said is still true, but both powers will have the ability to deny space to each other. And I think in the same way that nuclear mutually assured destruction prevents a nuclear war from actually happening, because it would just be bad for all the parties involved, I think a multipolar moon would create a similar situation. Broadly, the more entities that do manage to get access to the moon, the better, generally speaking. It probably creates a more stable situation, one where everyone individually is scared of doing something that will cause a retaliation that's even worse than whatever situation they were dealing with in the first place. It's interesting to compare space from a military perspective to the other domains in which military activity already happens. Having access to fully industrialized areas of space is kind of like having air superiority. Like typically in warfare, you can try to control the ground, you can try to control the seas, and you can try to control the skies. Obviously people don't typically live on the sea, so controlling the ocean is partly a matter of interrupting trade routes and partly a matter of having a staging ground from which to launch your ground and air campaigns. Controlling the ground is obviously to fight the enemy forces directly, because humans are a species that live on the ground, and if you don't want to just destroy things but you want to capture an area and hold it and have it be yours, and also if the goal is to do some kind of regime change in a country that you're invading or something like that, ground forces are required to do that. But then air power, in some senses, is kind of like a trump card, but not quite. Basically, if you have air superiority over a nation, that means you can fly over the airspace with impunity, and whilst it's possible for planes and helicopters to get shot down, generally speaking, it means you've got a platform to shoot and launch missiles and rain rockets down on any part of that entire piece of territory. So basically, you can just choose to delete a place on the ground anywhere, anytime, if you have air superiority. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to win a war, because the enemy could just hunker down in a way that you can't destroy them, and if you don't have ground forces, then you can't get to them, and also maintaining air superiority, generally speaking, is quite expensive. Fighter jets and bombers and stuff are not known for being cheap, and it's interesting to think about how this intersects with space warfare, because having control of an industrialized moon does allow you to project power anywhere in the Earth-Moon system. You can just choose to delete stuff from afar, but if you have a base on the moon that you can launch missiles from, that doesn't mean that you would always win if there was a conflict between an independent lunar base and a nation on Earth. There's a whole other layer of complication when it comes to deorbiting whatever missile that you've launched from the moon into the Earth's atmosphere. So if a lunar power was causing a big headache for the nations of the Earth, the advantages that the Earth has is it's protected by the atmosphere. You don't need any kind of life support to exist on the Earth, because the Earth's ecosphere is the life support for human beings to survive. And as many resources as the moon does have, there is just more diverse and accessible resources on the Earth, generally speaking. I'm not sure if there's a way to leverage that to topple the lunar power. I mean, it could be a case of if the lunar power is almost self-sufficient but not quite, you could just wait them out until they all eventually starve to death if they can't quite survive independently forever. But you could have to wait a very long time for that to happen. So whether or not that's a valid strategy is pretty situational. And obviously, if the lunar power can shoot down things coming from the Earth, firing missiles from the Earth at the moon is probably not going to work, because the powers on the moon are going to have a much easier job of shooting down the missiles coming from the Earth than vice versa, just because of the whole gravity and atmosphere situation. And even if the Earth did manage to rain down missiles onto the lunar surface, there are a lot of lava tunnels on the moon, which are actually decent ideas for where we could build colonies. So it's possible that at least some of the lunar population would be relatively well protected. So yeah, this whole war could to some degree go both ways, but I think whatever powers exist on the moon are going to have a very big advantage when it comes to space warfare, generally speaking. There is one more domain of warfare on top of ground, sea, air, and space, and that's cyber warfare. I wonder if that might be the main thing that a nation on Earth could do to sabotage an emerging power on the moon. I'm not sure of the specifics, but I mean, everyone's gangster till their CO2 scrubbers stop working. Could you remotely cripple lunar infrastructure? Maybe? I suppose that remains to be seen. I guess it just depends how they're designed. But one thing is for sure, and that's that if any one nation or corporation or whatever manages to become a unipolar dominant power on the moon, that might be a significant headache for all the other nations of the planet going forward, at least assuming they have any interest in the resources of the solar system, and could allow that one nation that has industrialized the moon to then exploit the resources of the entire solar system and deny access to the solar system for every other power. If a unipolar lunar situation does emerge, there will be some ways around it, but it will be a hard thing for everybody else to navigate. So when in the next few years we start making real big pushes towards colonizing the moon, and it's costing a lot, and there's a lot of accidents, and there's a lot of people saying that it's not worth it, and the whole thing's pointless, and we should just not bother, I want you to think about this video, because the architecture of humanity's future depends upon the decisions we're making today. But you know what's an even bigger decision? My decision to thank my elite level supporters. Thunderbolt 22A10, who has an ice sculpture of themselves making an ice sculpture of themselves. Nomad Greg, who found a lucky penny on the floor, licked it, and then put it back. Andrew Mole, who's in a deep and meaningful relationship with a cactus. John Beharani, Serrano, who's the guy who keeps stealing your hubcaps, JDK, who takes all of their medication anally, Mutantius Doom, whose hobby is covering themselves in oil and sliding on their tummy across polished surfaces, Stormester Ritter, who has a hibiscus biscuit in their meniscus, Nikita Lurie, who's cranking one out for the boys right now, Aaron Rowe, who's developed the basis for a new system of government which involves strange women lying in ponds distributing legendary swords to random passers-by, Bonk Chunk, who has a rubber fist they'd rather you not sniff, That One Boy, who's mixing up a batch as we speak, Trenton Caldwell, who just got a brand new mincer, and if it fits in there they're gonna mince it, Jimbo Quiz, who keeps finding other people's belly button lint inside their own belly button, Draco91, who likes listening to clams gurgle in a bucket, Surreal Melody, who replaced all their vertebrae with horizontebrae, Figure It Out, who's gonna make his own moon, with blackjack, and hookers. In fact, forget the moon. And thanks to all my other supporters too. Don't forget to join the Patreon or the channel membership if you want to be featured in my video credits or chat on the Discord, and as always, I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.